different, but you were sort of like you've kind of been turned into some sort of censorship boogie woman. I've never heard boogeyman turned into boogie woman before, but it makes it sound like someone pretty cool, actually. But.
Welcome back to Posting Through It. I'm Jared Holt.
And I'm Mike Hayden.
Thanks for joining us another week.
I really enjoyed our guest today, and I learned a lot about social media. You know, one person who is on social media is a fellow named Tim Pool. And I just wanted to just let our listeners know that we are hard at work on a Who is Tim Pool podcast episode, which I believe will be out next week, with a very special guest who happens to be a New York Mets fan, like myself. And so everybody's going to enjoy eating their vegetables with today's podcast and learn a lot. And then we are going to consume a large stuffed crust pizza next week on Tim Pool.
Yeah, we are hard at work, down in the shafts. If you can conjure the image in your mind, listeners, close your eyes unless you're driving, but imagine, the mechanic crawling out of the pit when you get your oil change, just covered in grease and oil. That is us hard at work preparing the Tim Pool episode.
Imagine, if you will, a man who wears his winter cap in the middle of August in the hot West Virginia sun.
A man who I once watched a video of this like weird alt-right D-list influencer pull his hat off his head. And I legitimately thought Tim was going to like punch him in the face. I thought.
I believe that's Millennial Matt.
Yeah.
But you will be learning about all that and more next week. But for now, a very, very in-depth discussion about social media and how it impacts the brain and our culture.
Joining Posting Through It now, we have Renée DiResta. She's an associate research professor at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown. Before that, she was technical research manager at the Stanford Internet Observatory. She is the author of a book I've really been enjoying over the last couple weeks called Invisible Rulers: The People Who Turn Lies into Reality. And I'm really excited to have her on the show this week. Renée, how's it going?
It's good. Thanks for having me on.
First off, how are you holding up? I mean, the world is kind of 10 kinds of fucked up and crazy right now. How are you doing?
It is so busy. I mean, between my job, which keeps me busy, and then now there's a whole pile of congressional hearings that are starting again that are keeping me busy. And then I've got 3 kids, which also keeps me busy, and travel, which is busy. So it's just like go, 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 go. I'm usually happiest that way, actually. So it's I feel like I'm getting things done, which I think helps me cope with the chaos.
Yeah, you're like me. It's like when the world is burning, there is almost a weird sense of, maybe it's just because I'm distracted, but like a mental peace.
Right, like agency. Like you can get something done. Yeah.
Which feels wrong and backwards. But Mike, do you feel that at all? Or I don't know.
I don't know. Like I've been doing nothing but my book edits, and so I kind of just feel nothing. Like the book doesn't come out until 2026. So
oh man,
so there's like a feeling of just being kind of mired in something that no one can see yet, right? So I don't know. I'm not feeling great about it, but next month.
That was a hard process, like just how long it takes between when you feel like you're done and then turning in the edits and then waiting like almost a year until everybody else sees it. I remember being surprised by just how long that gap was.
The gap is over. Invisible Rulers is out in the world. Like I said, I've really been enjoying it. It's connected a lot of sort of loose threads in my head, but the synopsis of Invisible Rulers, it's just this excruciatingly in-depth but somehow still digestible look at the way that social media is becoming sort of the new invisible ruler of society. And I think borrowing the idea of invisible rulers is a really interesting way to approach it. And maybe we should start there. Like the idea of the invisible ruler, the ghost in the machine, whatever you want to call it. Where does that come from? And why did you pick that to try to explain how social media works?
Yeah, it comes from Edward Bernays. It comes from the book Propaganda from the late 1920s, 1929 or so. And I remember when I was, so my background's in computer science and political science. You know, I rather infamously, as it kind of, the way it came out was sort of infamous, but I worked for CIA when I was an undergrad. And so I had been in my very kind of first job was in intelligence, but not in propaganda at all, and in kind of technical work. But I'd always been interested in this question of, how people came to hold opinions. And I got very interested in specifically how people came to form opinions about vaccines when I was a new mom being suddenly deluged with the kind of stuff that Facebook throws at you when you're a new parent, which is, all of a sudden your entire feed changes. You're just, your entire experience on social media changes the minute that you have a kid, and you don't realize it until you're there. The minute you post your first baby picture, boom, like everything that is recommended to you is different. And so I got very interested in that question of why, right? Why are we shown certain things? How do we form opinions? How do we form new friend groups? Because I really did, right, around that time. How does our identity change? How does what is appealing to us in our kind of new identity, how does that shift happen? Around that time that I was paying attention to all of a sudden being tossed into these, getting this constant recommended stream of content, anti-vaccine content, as that was happening to me, the conversation about social media was also very much focused on ISIS. These two things were happening concurrently. So as I was studying anti-vaccine networks on social media, other people were studying ISIS networks on social media. And I was really struck by the similarities between these two completely different groups, but just how the structure of social media had fundamentally transformed how they could communicate, who they could reach, the ways in which networks were forming, the ways in which messages were being pushed out to people, unexpected things like if you followed one, the recommender system would push you more. Just the complete lack of awareness from the recommender system of what it was suggesting to you, just the absolute kind of amorality of the entire thing. And I started kind of thinking, all right, what is new here? And it seemed like the technology was very, very new. So I was focusing a lot on that. But I thought, okay, we have a tendency to overreact to new technologies as being, okay, this time is so different, this time is so different. So I got very interested in reading about propaganda literature from the olden days, literally from a century back. And that was what took me to Bernays and Lippmann and Jacques Ellul and these sort of foundational writers that I had never read in college, actually. Because I had not really gone through that, that training. And I remembered reading the book Propaganda and getting to the passage, there are invisible rulers who control the destinies of millions. And he's talking in this passage about the role of appealing to people in this capacity as members of a group identity. And it just kind of really clicked in my head. It really stuck with me as this, it resonated with what I felt like I was seeing. This idea that all of a sudden we were engaging so foundationally as members of groups and thinking, oh, this is so interesting. Here is somebody a century ago talking about the power of that group identity, talking about the power of being unaware of where a message is coming from, but feeling it resonates so deeply with who we are as people and that desire to belong to a group that I just got very interested in that particular body of literature. And I really started kind of going down this rabbit hole. This was maybe 8 years ago now, into trying to understand, what was new and different, which was the technology, but what was foundationally the same, which was the psychology of belonging and the way that propaganda worked, the way that it functioned, and why we wanted to pay attention to these kinds of messages.
So the concept of the invisible ruler that Bernays lays out and that you explain in the book is, there are visible rulers. These are our politicians, prominent members of society, governments, major media outlets, and then there are invisible rulers, which are the kind of force, it could be like a force, like advertisers. If advertisers pull your funding on your cable network after a segment, well, they're a kind of an invisible ruler, sort of, or the press person that generates like that gets all the media to show up at a conference or a ribbon cutting. Like that is a type of invisible ruler. The person leaking information to an outlet is an invisible ruler. And I just thought that was a really interesting way to think about today, looking at the Trump administration, but really just the last, decade or two of politics as social media has become more important, more integrated into political strategy. It makes me wonder, like, is the Libs of TikTok account like a new kind of invisible ruler? If outrage generated on that account can shake up the deliberations of the press shop at the White House, what say you?
Well, that's the argument that I make, is that the influencers are profoundly important, right? That content creators and influencers are the most effective propaganda that we see today in a lot of ways, because people don't think about them in that context. They still think about political propaganda in particular as being something that comes, from the top down, the sort of old Chomsky model of, the mass media being in cahoots with the government and, taking its cues from advertisers and taking its cues what it can and can't say from from some government leader. When what's happening now, I would argue, is that the information is increasingly, public opinion is increasingly shaped from the bottom up. And you have these accounts that are very, very good at understanding how to tap into psychology, how to tap into group identity, how to tap into a desire to belong, to participate, to be a part of a movement. That's what Libs of TikTok is actually good at, right? They take something, they turn it into a, they take a, we use the term main character, but they take sort of an avatar of an extreme opinion held by an alternative faction, right? Some enemy, some lib. They make that an object of ridicule, and that act of participating in the ridicule really binds these people together. Like, that's what the other faction is getting out of it. It's really solidifying that in-group cohesion by hating these other people, that sort of out-group animosity. That's what really kind of brings this group of people together. And what you see is the realization that can then be used as not just an online main character moment where we're all getting together to hate this person or yell at this person or participate in this online trend. It actually then is used, it's kind of like transmuted into a bigger story. Do you remember the eating the pets thing that happened during
of course.
No one will ever forget eating the pets.
Of course.
You're with two people who might as well have been eating the pets.
But that's another example of this, right? You have an online rumor, you have something that galvanizes participation. People are having fun with it, right? They're making these memes, they're using Grok. They're coming together as a community. It's bringing that cohesion, that movement building. But then you see JD Vance pick it up, right? And all of a sudden, it's a bigger story. Now it's not just about this one stupid meme or this one weird accusation or this one person who regrettably is photographed, holding a goose or whatever, that poor guy who winds up in the photo, the actual human being who becomes kind of like the target of this online mob. JD Vance then turns it into like, well, this is really a story about immigration. This is really a story about who should be in America, who should be in that community, who that community is for. And that's where you see that handoff, right? From rumor and community and, socialization and mob dynamics to the propaganda campaign around the bigger story, which is who is America for? What is the deep story about immigration that we're telling here? And that's why I think this handoff that happens there, it increasingly comes from the bottom and is picked up by the political elite as opposed to moving from the top down where some machine picks it up and sells it.
Why does it feel like reactionaries in general, or people who, who may even have fascist ambitions are able to take advantage of this technology so much better than left, liberal, whomever, right? Even centrist.
I've kind of wondered about that too.
I always believed that the algorithm sort of kind of pulls people to the right, that it benefits moneyed interests more than anything else. And maybe left right isn't the right way to even look at this. I don't know, but it just seems like those things that would be that would float to the top of a left liberal agenda don't get the same kind of juice as something like the they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs.
There have definitely been, you can definitely point to mob dynamics where we've had the weird main character of the day situations that are not explicitly right coded, right? You remember I love drinking coffee in the morning with my husband, and the weird, absolutely insane mob that sprung up on that one. And
the replies would be like, "This is insensitive to people who can't drink coffee in the morning with their
or
husbands.
don't have husbands, don't have gardens." There've been, or Covington Catholic was another one that came to mind that I wrote about in the book. The example where there was like the kid in the MAGA hat, and that sort of situation where people really prejudged that situation in very unfortunate ways before the actual facts emerged. So you definitely do see it. As far as what is curated, that's been one of these things where there have been some papers. There was one that Twitter itself was members of researchers at Twitter were authors on the paper. I'm blanking on the name right now, but that did make this argument that actually right-leaning content does tend to perform better. It was sort of put out almost in opposition to the argument that right-leaning content is censored or downranked or deprecated on Twitter. But as far as one of the things that that happens, I think, is also just this investment, right? Who is really making these... that handoff piece, that question of like, when are the political elites really grabbing this stuff and pulling it up? We saw Donald Trump doing this in 2016. I mean, you guys remember like MAGA 3X, right? Or when Donald Trump was running this very insurgent style campaign, Hillary Clinton wasn't doing that. Hillary Clinton wasn't on there saying like, what are my meme lords making and how can I boost it?
No, it was Pokemon Go to the polls. Here I am, right? Chilling in Cedar Rapids.
So it was like that investment, I think, wasn't really there. There wasn't that same appreciation for it. Then there was, Yochai Benkler and the books that looked at the sort of investment in the right-wing media ecosystem, even that was not influencer driven, but just the networked propaganda book that looked at the link, the sort of link-driven ecosystem of just the alt media apparatus that emerged both on Facebook and in the broader web. They really invested much more heavily there. I think also because the sense was that mainstream media was owned by the libs. So why would you invest in this ecosystem when you already had this apparatus over here? That was the sense I got looking at the anti-vaxxers too, right? Like, that's why they invested, because they didn't have access to that other ecosystem. So they went and built their own using the tools that were available to them, even as the CDC and the institutionalists were like, whatever, we don't need that because we have this other thing. So part of it was investment. Part of it was a conscious decision to do this, right? To say like, we can make our people feel empowered by boosting them. Jared, you must have seen this also, right? There'd be these people who their entire Twitter bio was like, retweeted by Donald Trump 4 times, Donald Trump Jr. 6 times, like Dan Bongino 4 times. Like, it was such a point of pride.
It's like a trophy case.
Yeah, exactly. Like that, there was like that sense that like the elites would boost you. I don't think I've ever seen anybody on the left do that. Maybe because, I don't know if that's just not a cultural thing or if it's not happening.
It is, to be fair, very cringe.
It is extremely, it is. But
I think that's credit to the left liberal side of social media. It's a pretty cringe thing to do.
But at the same time, you do get people who, you'll see them say like, oh my God, AOC followed me, right? Or, so-and-so followed me. Like, there is still that sense of like, my hero who is good at social media is paying attention to me. I had that good tweet and somebody liked it. People want to be recognized as being part of that community, as having input and insight. And I think that it's treated very, very differently. And So starting in 2016, you really saw that culture begin to emerge, and it was, they really doubled down in 2020, and it's kind of continued ever since.
So I would be curious your thoughts on why this has been so successful. In the book, you bring up a couple things that I think are interesting to get into around that question. One is the 99-1 problem, which I have to say slowly so it doesn't sound like I'm saying like one giant messed up number. Being that like on a lot of social media platforms, like something like 90% of the users fairly consistently across platforms just lurk. They like don't post or anything. They just check it out and leave. 9% of users will post like sometimes, which an occasional user, quote unquote, of social media platforms tends to be defined fairly liberally. It's like, did you post this week? Okay, you're an occasional user. And then 1% of social media users are just like, well, me. Just incessant, several posts per day. We will not stop. We will not log off. We will not stop posting kind of thing. Then there's also the algorithmic sorting of the recommendation systems. The algorithm has become kind of like this like sloppy kind of boogeyman in the wrong hands when people talk about it. But the fact of the matter is these platforms recommend you content, and it seems like in recent years are doing it more and more. I can't get on Instagram without like every third post being an advertisement or some kind of recommended post that I didn't ask for. And the systems that recommend that content shape not only what we see, but also the kind of content that gets created, because the influencers want to appeal to them and like make a living or get notoriety or whatever goal they might have. So all of that's to say, what we see online is like so far removed oftentimes from reality. We interact with people in ways we would never interact with them in person. We see content that is just like borderline unnatural. You use an example of like Guitar Guy getting audience captured and stuff, which spoke very directly to me as somebody with like a pedal board full of like gizmos and funny boxes that make silly sounds. But it's just like the content almost, it's like it is an extension of reality, but it is also just so like deeply unnatural too. But yet it has this vice grip on society. I'm curious like how you square that in your head.
What you're describing now and the things that you're seeing in your feed that you didn't ask for, that's called unconnected content. And Facebook actually discloses what percentage of unconnected content it shows you. You can see that in their transparency reports quarterly, which is actually kind of nice. I mean, most platforms won't tell you that. And it's risen from about 8% to, last time I did a report on this was like March of 2024. So it was around 25% by that point. Right. Wow. And the reason for it is to compete with TikTok. That is why they're doing it. Right. Because TikTok, their big innovation was the realization that people just wanted to be entertained. And it actually didn't matter if they had a social graph that was attached to those, to the people whose content they were seeing. Whereas Facebook had started in the quaint early days of social platforms where you followed your friends and you looked at like party photos. Right. I mean, that was what we did with it. Same thing with Instagram to some extent. As they realized that you could build an entire, like what they called interest graphs originally. And then as they realized that interests were actually in some ways quite transient, that it could be entertainment and memes, which didn't have to be tied to some deep interest you had, but could just be like the thing that you were obsessed with that week. I remember like I started, I got recommended the Red Bull Dance Your Style, right? Like competition for 2024, which actually came out like 4 or 5 months ago, I think. So these are not even new videos. But I watched one and I was like, hey, this is actually really good. These dancers are like amazing. I used to dance back in the day. And so I do watch dance content. And I started watching more of them and like actually then going and looking up some of the dancers I liked. And this was maybe like 2 weeks ago. My entire YouTube feed is nothing but dance videos now. That is it. Like that is all I'm getting, And I think probably for like the next couple weeks until I hit on something else or like go proactively looking for something else, like that's what I'm going to get. And it's just going to be like a deluge. And Instagram is like this too. Like it really like kind of overemphasizes recency. Like you do one thing and then it thinks like, okay, boom, this is what they want. And in order to keep them on site, we're going to give them just like an absolute shit ton of it. And like, that's what you're going to get. And it's very hard to break out of it. And I remember when I was looking at, funny enough, this unconnected content project, we were looking at AI slop, which didn't even have a name then. We were just doing this project studying like these garbage AI pages that had just begun to emerge because like Midjourney had just become available to the public. And that was all I was getting. And it actually rendered Facebook like completely unusable for me because once you engaged with one of the pages, literally that was all that you were going to get, because the pull from the recommender system, like people really were curious about AI generated content, and it just pushed it and pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. And one of the things that you used to be able to see on CrowdTangle was the engagement with these pages. After they kind of took CrowdTangle away, you have to actually do a lot more work to find the stats now. But what you would see is the view counts on this content was like, tens and hundreds of millions of views on some of the videos or some of the images. And then all of a sudden they changed the recommender system and you just see the content engagement just flatline, just like boom, just drops off a cliff. And it's because it's entirely determined by what the platform decides to show people. It's not like organic searches where people are going and looking for the page. So that power of suggestion and that nudge is really incredibly powerful. And it's also completely opaque, right? So what you're seeing and what your neighbor is seeing are completely different. Every now and then there'll be some cultural moment that everybody gets, right? Something that is like very, very major, but otherwise it is so random and so determined just by the things that you do that it makes it, I think, challenging to feel like we're having some kind of shared conversation or shared, like national discourse in a way.
Yeah, well, we have like we're completely divided, right? Yeah. Like that used to be people would talk about, oh, we're a divided country, and now it's like there's no discussion about it anymore. No. We just know that it's like we just know that we're just completely divided. And I was just going to ask about that the way those sort of algorithms kind of heat up, in front of you, and they just sort of take you further on a journey. Is it accurate to say that this kind of widespread sort of fascist streak inside MAGA, or MAGA itself being a fascist movement, is that the result of these algorithms? I mean, because it didn't seem like there was an agenda to turn the country this far to the right or this authoritarian, right? There was a pushback against Trump from the Republican Party the minute he started running, and a lot of people trying to push against it. And he became a social media phenomenon. And it seems like now, like a decade later, I don't want to oversimplify, but it does feel like the algorithm really has taken the entire party or half the country on this ride that they wouldn't have gone on necessarily a decade ago. I
think it helps things become very normalized. It's not only the algorithm. That's the one thing that I think it's like I try to make the point, even in the book, it's like the reason I describe it as influencer, algorithm, crowd is like you can't have one of those things without the other. The algorithm serves what it has available. So whether, it's showing me these dance videos because they're there and I like it, right? And it is that because I like it piece that actually is, one of the things that's there, right? There's like curiosity, there's interest, there's something that keys off of it. This is the same thing with, I'll use anti-vaccine content as an example. When I was getting pushed it, I would click. Now, I was like kind of hate clicking. I was curiosity clicking. But the reason I kept getting more of it was because I engaged. And so, when you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the influencer is incentive, or the guitar guy example that I created just to not point to one particular person as the audience capture avatar. The influencer is creating content for the algorithm and the audience, and they have to always be doing it for both. Otherwise, their content isn't going to get promoted, which means that nobody's going to see it, and they're not going to get that initial burst of engagement, like the likes and the shares or views that are then going to push it out to more people. So they have to be doing it for the algorithm and the crowd. And these things always, like, you have to think about it basically as like a triangle. And so what that means with the kind of normalization piece, the thing that's very interesting about the influencer is that they become that like engine of normalization. And when they realize that the audience is receptive to something, that feedback loop between the influencer and the audience means that they're essentially getting permission to say the more extreme thing because the audience is like, okay, cool, right? If the audience is like, no, what are you doing? Then they won't do it. But if the audience is like, yes, totally, I'm with you, let's go, then they do. And that's where you see that, like, you can't just blame the tech, right? The tech recognizes that cycle is happening and it accelerates it. It's definitely an accelerant. But there is that piece of, yeah, I'm curious. Like, yeah, I'm going along for the ride with you. Yes, I'm actually going to kind of like, in some cases, nudge you in a particular direction. There's this, some of the research that like Damon Santola does. He's a professor at, I think UPenn, if I'm not mistaken. I hope I didn't get that wrong. Where what he talks about is this thing called complex contagion, where the influencer is almost acting as like the gatekeeper in a sense, where they're deciding, they're seeing their kind of fandom talking about all this stuff. They can decide whether to pick it up and move it along, right? By boosting that random thing that that their fan is saying, like you can see this in the election rumor mill. If you pick it up and boost it and say like big if true, you're still boosting it. You're still kind of giving it your credibility. You're giving it lift. You're pushing it out to more people. And what we've seen over time, just using the example of like, election denialism, is that is a fully normal, reasonable, completely accepted position to hold in that community now, in a way where even 4 years ago, they would still try to couch it a little bit, hey, some people should, people should really look into this. I don't know, big if true, somebody should go check that out. Now they're like, look at this, they're doing it again. They're stealing it. Here they are stealing it. And so you can see even in just 4 years, the complete normalization of that belief, so that they're not even gatekeeping it anymore. They're just like moving it right along. And that's this shift from, they're no longer risking their credibility and kind of gating it and serving as a limit to it. They're essentially just like moving it right on through.
And I think as that audience gets bigger, it also has like it disincentivizes the opposite, right? I mean, Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney are political has-beens at this point. Why? Because they had the nerve to stick to their point that the Capitol riot was not ideal, right? And they were punished, right? So it's like a punish mechanism too. But sort of last question on the theory of understanding part of this before we shift gears a little bit is, I want to get your thoughts on just how impactful is this stuff really? Because sometimes, like in my day job, it can be, I sometimes struggle to like ultra clearly articulate to people that are maybe totally unfamiliar with this, right? It's like somebody who manages an organization who spends like an hour a week on the internet because they have like a real job doing a real thing. But, sometimes a post can get like 10,000 retweets or something. But what's it mean? Nothing, right? Or sometimes a post gets like 100 retweets and then holy shit, there's like a hate group that just showed up at your book launch event or something, so how powerful is social media? Like really, is there, any sort of consistent identifiers in terms of like, once this happens, or like if it does this, or, it's like all media, it's, I've never been under the illusion that we would like record a podcast or I would write a news article or a paper and it would change the world forever. It's like, it's just material and people use it and pick it up for whatever they might want to do, or whatever they might want to take away from it. But is social media and the way it's integrated in our lives like inherently impactful in a way that other media maybe isn't? Or are there things about it or like ways of interpreting it that can make it more or less impactful in any given circumstance?
The thing that, so first of all, I agree that oftentimes it's overstated where someone's like, look at this one post, it got 10,000 likes. Oh my God, that's such a big deal, right? And we've known for a long time now, dating back to media theory studies and from the 1940s that, what they called the hypodermic model of media changing people's minds, the idea that if you saw something on the nightly news, your opinion would magically be changed. Like, no, that's not how it works. But one of the things that's interesting about it is that what studies did find, even back then, was that it was, your opinion would be shaped based on the conversations that you had with people, right? And that it was actually, there would be members of the community that were called opinion leaders who paid a lot of attention to media, and that you would talk to those people who paid a lot of attention to media, and you would kind of decide amongst yourselves what the facts of the matter were, right? And that was sort of how you would, over time, shift your opinion and come to believe something or come to like a political candidate or whatever it was. And what I think is interesting about social media, and particularly influencers, particularly creators, and why I spend so much time paying attention to them, is that those two things are now like merged into one thing, right? So they're both media in that they have that like elevated reach, that mass reach, and they're kind of just like you, and they're talking to you. And the community of people who kind of grow up around them, the sort of friends that you make online, are the people that you're talking to. So you no longer have that maybe more diverse set of people that you meet in the real world. You're no longer geographically bounded with all the different constraints that come with that. Instead, you have this very kind of homogenous group that you've been sort of shunted into as your people you may know algorithm is like, you're just like these people. You should all be just like each other together. Oh, look, you all share weird anti-government beliefs. You should join this QAnon group over here, right? You remember this from the olden days of like the Facebook recommender system. That sort of dynamic of, hey, we're going to put you all together. You're all going to spend a whole lot of time talking to each other. You're going to follow influential figures who are kind of just like you. They're going to talk very directly with you. They're not going to feel like media. They're also going to have massive reach and all of the sort of trappings that go with what we used to think of as media. So they're this weird hybrid figure. And that's where you're going to spend all of your time, right? That's going to be the, as you spend less and less time with friends in the real world, this is going to kind of replace your socialization too. So I think that it makes it an incredibly effective persuasion engine, just in terms of like these different dynamics all coming together in one place. That's why I think it's actually a really interesting thing to be paying attention to. I think there's this dynamic of like the rumor into propaganda cycle, right? Like eating the pets was actually a thing. Is everything a thing? No, but some of them hit, and it's understanding how these random moments feed into these bigger stories, and then also the ways in which we as individuals actively have the power to participate in shaping those things now, which makes people feel, I think, much more invested as opposed to when they were kind of sitting on their couch just watching it go by. So that's what I think is different.
I have an unscientific theory, and I'd be curious if you would weigh in just to tell me whether it has any basis or not. So I always thought like something about influencer culture or social media was more effective at radicalizing people, or at least getting people to be more, to be more laser focused on one particular thing or the other. In part because people access you, influencers access you, usually completely alone and trapped with your phone or your device or whatever. Whereas, the newspaper is something that's like, it's out in the open. Everybody knows that you're reading it and what you're reading when you open a newspaper. And when you like watch Better Call Saul with your husband or whatever, there's a kind of like sit on the couch and watch TV together, go to the movie theater and watch the movie together, go to the concert and, and watch Pavement play or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
So these things that I just mentioned, but when you're kind of like just online, you're kind of in this, this sort of stereotype cliche, whatever, of like you're just in a dark room and Alex Jones is ranting at you about, what Ukraine is secretly trying to do. It has a different it has a different effect, right? And then the social media, maybe I'm wrong, but like that's just the way I've always thought about it. It's just people, particularly when you look at like things like the incel community and and those kind of misogynistic places and stuff like that, where you just imagine these guys in these really dark rooms, like just their brains cooking on propaganda. They're not socializing. They're just trapped with their influencers.
I think they are actually. Like one thing, people will take that stuff and they'll chuck it into the group chat, right? Or the Discord server or the message board. It's actually like really, or the, subreddit back in the day when that stuff was on Reddit more. I think that there's actually a fair bit of, I saw this thing and now I'm sharing it. And I think that it is actually very much who you share it with. I mean, you look at the number of random links that just land on even the Chan boards, right? Like people are, I see this thing I share with my friends. I see this thing I share with my friends. Like that's kind of the function of the group chat, right? It's to like, we're like jointly processing this weird thing that we've just seen. You can do it in public on Twitter, right? Or whatever, we're Blue Sky, wherever we are now. And you can do it with strangers on those places, but you also have this, these places where you have that more persistent standing community. That's, I think, the difference between the group spaces, like the spaces that are group oriented, whether that's Facebook groups, which are a little more obscured, or the ones where like the message boards where you can actually kind of see it all go by, versus the ones where you're just talking in public to whatever random person happens to be online at the same time as you. You do see, there was like I used to say it as a joke, but I think it's actually kind of true, right? Like Twitter makes these mobs that kind of come together really spontaneously, but Facebook was where you would have like the cults that would really come out of there, right? Like the people who were like, we are here, man. And like Alex Jones stuff would get tossed in there all the time. It was just, this is where we are. This is where like, not only are we here to pay attention and to process and to share these links and to talk about them in here, but we're also here to be activists about that stuff that we've just shared. And it was very much like, that's where you'll see those, the standing communities will be a little bit more like that.
So the government has taken some interest in this. Our good friends, the U.S. government, avid listeners to the podcast. I learned in a very strange way that I may retell on a later episode of this show. But the Republican Party particularly has taken a pretty heavy interest in social media. Like you said, in the early days, it was all ISIS. It was like, how is ISIS using Twitter to get towns to like empty out before anybody even sets a foot there, right? Or like, how are they using it to recruit, which like, even if it was a small number of people, that's a huge, it doesn't take very many people to make a huge impact on something, right? So it started on that. And then like some steps happened, and now it's like Jim Jordan grilling Mark Zuckerberg about the Diamond and Silk Facebook page and why it's not getting as many likes as it should. Or like Donald Trump Jr. on Instagram being like, my post only got 10,000 faves. Obviously, I'm being censored here. And like that became that sort of partisan calling card. On the flip side, especially after the election of Trump, and, as Democrats tried to hit their head against the brick wall, figuring out what happened, one of the early theories was like, well, it's the internet. It's Russian trolls on the internet and bots on the internet, which had a grain of truth to it. It's not the whole story, but like even a little bit. But in the course of all of that, people, including yourself very personally, have been turned into, Mike, you said it earlier, like artificial boogie women, which I agree, Mike, sounds incredibly cool. But like, I don't imagine that experience felt incredibly cool for you, Renee.
Honestly, the first time I ever heard of you was in the context of hearing how horrible a person you are from a person who is genuinely horrible. To be clear, I can't remember what Nazi was throwing that out.
So the government went from being like kind of interested, vaguely like supportive on quote unquote national security grounds of like this sort of research into how does the internet influence the world, what misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, blah, blah,
I always
blah.
hated that word, but yes.
Me too. That's if it, I realize I speak monotone, but like there's contempt in my voice, but, so they went from being vaguely interested to then just like going on the offensive against researchers and institutions that look at this stuff. You had a very unfortunate front row seat to this, kind of through the whole life cycle. What changed? Why did they get so fucking mad at everybody who tries to understand how the internet works?
Yeah, because some of us said the 2020 election was free and fair, and that was an inconvenience to them. That's why.
That sucks.
Yes.
Yeah, that's your first mistake.
Yeah, I know. Troublesome facts. No, so first of all, there were some really clear, bright lines. Obviously, ISIS was extraordinary, unambiguously clear. Like, we don't like terrorists on our social platforms. Though, actually, it's funny enough, if you go back in time and you pull up the old, kind of media articles about that, Twitter is, for a while there, making the one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter kind of argument, wondering, like, is it a slippery slope if we start taking these accounts down, and like, where will it end? For a while
today,
there,
they would be called, like unintentionally based.
It was but it was like the Bataclan attack and a couple of other things that really shifted the narrative as people began to realize that, per our earlier chat, propaganda does work, in fact, and at some point, some susceptible people commit atrocities, and that is, the trade-off of that. They began to take down some of that content. What happened with Russia then? This was one of these things that was a little bit frustrating for me, because I was asked to run one of the research teams that analyzed the data sets that were turned over to the Senate Intelligence Committee. So there were data sets that the platforms attributed to the Internet Research Agency. Just to be clear, I did not attribute. I was just given the data that they attributed.
And the Internet Research Agency is like the firm that is kind of widely thought of as like executing a lot of like online Russian information operation kind of things. Yeah,
they would use these trolls when they wanted to, kind of change the information space ahead of invading Crimea or, manipulating the American discourse. They didn't do it solely to interfere in the election. They did it far more broadly than that. But they did it through the 2016 election, which was how it came to be very caught up in the Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump discourse. My report on that was actually, it's funny because I reread it again recently as I was fighting with Matt Taibbi about it. It's fairly boring, to be honest. It is extremely descriptive because I wanted it to be as neutral a description of what happened as possible. Nothing that we were given would have enabled us to answer the question, did this swing the election? Right? So I just wanted to say, like, here is what it is. Here is how it worked. Here is what it did. And, here is how it intersected with these various communities. And here's why we should be paying attention to it. However, because of the broader conversation about Donald Trump and collusion, which was wholly outside of what I looked at, it got caught up in that, that thing that came to be called Russiagate, which no one can define, but you understand it. I too became part of the quote unquote Russiagate collusion hoax, right? Because anybody who did any research, even vaguely touching Russia, was rebranded as this Democrat operative trying to, allege that Donald Trump's election was illegitimate. So that was a very frustrating thing. But again, it was, it's not really the end of the world. And to their credit, the Trump administration did actually institute a series of counter foreign disinformation efforts within the FBI, within DHS, within the intelligence community, within ODNI. I feel like I've just left one out. Oh, and within the State Department, the Senate expanded the mandate of the Global Engagement Center to counter foreign propaganda. That had actually been established to counter ISIS propaganda, terrorist propaganda. It was established to counter Russian and Chinese propaganda as well. So around this time, China had also begun interfering. Iran had also begun interfering. And, and as we found out, like the US Pentagon was running influence operations, it became table stakes. But there was this like really clear line, again, still around foreign versus domestic. The problem was what happened in 2020 was that a lot of the same kinds of dynamics of, wildly viral false accusations intended to manipulate and mislead people began to emerge from domestic American influencers, right? And what we started to see was that those narratives, false and misleading claims intended to manipulate audiences, which do in some capacity, some specific ones did meet the definition of disinformation campaigns, were being run by domestic American influencers. And this created a real problem. So those of us who were studying the 2020 election, like us at Stanford Internet Observatory, Kate Starbird's team at University of Washington Center for an Informed Public, DFR Lab. I think you might have been at DFR Lab at the time, right?
I was.
Or had you just left?
I didn't work on EIP. I was like deep in militia land at the time,
right?
But, which looking back was maybe a blessing.
Yeah, you escaped. But as this, as EIP, this is what for the listeners, like that was what we called the sort of interinstitutional consortium that came together. Graphica was the fourth org. We came together again largely because we thought we would see a lot of foreign interference. And, Russia, Iran, China did mess around. But the most impactful claims, both rumors and, these allegations that like Dominion voting machines were changing votes and that the election wasn't free and fair, that it had been stolen, all the things that we chronicled, the really impactful stuff was not coming from foreign trolls. It was coming from Donald Trump and his inner circle. And as we chronicled that, as we documented it, as we occasionally engaged with tech platforms and said, hey, some of these posts appear to violate your terms of service, as we engaged with state and local election officials and said, hey, like this rumor about Sharpie markers, this is kind of a big deal, you should probably respond. That work that we did, which we did in full view of the public, we wrote a 250-page final report on it, was recast 2 years later when in 2022 the House flipped and Jim Jordan got his gavel. It was recast by the Weaponization Committee as a vast effort not to track what was happening in the 2020 election, but to somehow mass censor the 2020 election in real time. And those narratives that I've described, Dominion, Sharpiegate, these like massive viral things, that we watched go by and that we chronicled as they went by, they allege that we somehow censored as they went by, which is complete bullshit because anybody listening, like Fox News paid out $700 and something million over that Dominion claim. But the allegation that Jim Jordan wants you to believe is that we somehow censored it, right? Nonetheless, like that was really the tipping point whereby they began to make this argument, particularly because Donald Trump was also deplatformed after January 6th, that academic research into disinformation, academic research into rumors and propaganda was really a vast plot to censor conservatives. And that's because the vast majority of people who were moderated, or who had their accounts taken away after January 6th were, the QAnon accounts and some of the conservative election deniers.
I remember these, I believe that your reports or the reports that you were working on and other folks at the time, and they were all like the Dominion pushers were of course Trump and Don Jr. and people like that, but also like people like Tim Pool. Yeah. And these are people who all have some connections to Russia as well, right? And one thing, right, like Tim Pool has recently founded that scandal, like that Tenet Media. Right, yeah. So, I mean, is it like when we say that they're like U.S. influencers, I am not saying that it's like another Russiagate or whatever buried inside the U.S. thing, but like have the lines broken down so much between our American influencers and like, are the goals so closely aligned between MAGA and the Kremlin that it almost doesn't matter anymore? Like there's no need for a conspiracy anymore because they're just kind of, look what's happening, right? You see what's happening with Trump and the Trump administration and getting rid of everything that the Kremlin would want them to get rid of. Bottom text. We
wouldn't make that attribution at Stanford Internet Observatory. We kept those lines very bright because in our opinion, we would talk about the, narrative overlap is like one very, very, very small part. And that's because even when I did the work for the Senate on the data set that covered from 2015 to 2017, the Russian trolls that were targeting the right would just go pick up Turning Point USA memes, and they would literally cover the Turning Point logo with their own logo, and they would just plagiarize. And that's because it's always been true. Well, I mean, they would do this with like a whole lot of different communities. They would target the Black community, and they would pull from like Black media and plagiarize from there. They would plagiarize from news media. They had this really terrible, like the live, laugh, love, like that horrible shit, the Pinterest lady stuff. Like they had a Being Liberal one that targeted women that used that kind of stuff, which I'm sure they just pulled from Etsy. But they didn't have to come up with new stuff because Americans do it to ourselves. And if you want to create identitarian divisive content, you just go and take what's already available to you. And so when we would talk about foreign interference, it was very important to us that we weren't relying just on content, that we were always looking at either some sort of evidence of like a network, a network in play, or explicit accounts where we could say this is demonstrably tied to some sort of foreign network, some sort of foreign actor. So we did in our interest to kind of like keep those two things separate. Like we wouldn't have made that argument, but you certainly can make the point that there is a lot of ideological overlap. And I read the Tenet Media indictments also. There is clearly a realization that kind of stuff can happen. I mean, they would also they ran some, what they call it, peace data, I think was the name of it, if I recall correctly, like a Bernie left kind of garbage site that they tried for a while. So, anytime they want to appeal to some sort of, niche identitarian politics, they're going to go and find it and find someone who can boost it. And, I have no doubt that they're going to continue to do it, particularly now that, again, I mentioned kind of to its credit, most of that election defense infrastructure was built and established during the Trump 1 administration. In the first 6 weeks of the Trump 2 administration, it's all been destroyed. Just to be clear, all of it is gone. Foreign Influence Task Force was dismantled. All those employees at CISA who had the audacity to say that the 2020 election was free and fair have been placed on administrative leave, right? The ODNI, a lot of those people have been, the political appointees are gone. It's not totally clear what they're going to staff there. That's always hard to follow. Because it's, within the intelligence community. And then the Global Engagement Center was defunded back in December.
It seems like they're quite well set up to just, shoehorn in whatever foreign influence things are going to help them and just allow it to happen.
Well,
it's
that the justification for it is like Russiagate. Like that's which again, I can't define. I actually could not define Russiagate for you if I tried at this point. It's like, theoretically collusion, but also apparently now just the fact that it happened, again, like, when I get called a Russiagate hoaxer and I'm like, my report was really boring, guys, you should read it, The other piece of it that's kind of fascinating, though, is like where the social media platforms are going to come down, because it has never been any kind of regulatory requirement for them to do those investigations. And so as I mentioned, Jim Jordan got his gavel and he decided that the Election Integrity Partnership and all of the work that we had done was part of this vast cabal. And the argument that they made was that we did our work at the direction of the deep state, because remember, Trump ran the government, Trump appointees ran the government during the 2020 election. So somehow, even though this letter that we get from Jim Jordan alleges that he's investigating the Biden censorship regime, the people that we were talking to worked for the Trump administration. So we find ourselves in this sort of surreal, Kafkaesque, universe in which we're being accused of being told by the government to tell the tech companies to take down conservative tweets. And they come up with this number like 22 million tweets. And they get that number, 22 million, by going to our report, which again has been on the internet for 2 years by this point. And in our table of the most viral narratives, we had like the top 10 most viral narratives that we had followed, which we calculated after the election, right? We added up all of the numbers, like 9 million for Dominion and 700,000 for Sharpiegate, whatever it was. And at the bottom of the column, it sums up to 22 million. And so the number that was the top, the sum total of the most viral stories was 22 million. And they just reframed that. They literally just took that number, and Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger sat under oath in a congressional hearing and said, Stanford Internet Observatory and the Election Integrity Partnership censored 22 million tweets. Just a fucking insane allegation, And I was this is
insane.
surreal.
If I was that sloppy and it was clear that I was that sloppy, it's so crazy because when I was in journalism school, I was reading Taibbi in Rolling Stone, with my long form investigative professor, just being this guy's amazing. I want to be him. And if I had made the kind of blunders he seems to make every week or every time he tries to talk about this, I would have just shot off to an island somewhere and never shown my face again.
Well, you wouldn't have been able to work.
No,
right?
I wouldn't have a
you
job.
would have faced repercussion because your ideology is you can do almost anything on the right and get away with it in terms of journalism.
This is really important, I think, as a point. I edited that report, just to be clear. One of the things that and it was a massive team effort, but I was the one who edited, aggregated it, pulled it all together. Kate's team wrote one chapter. People at Graphica wrote the foreign influence section. Different people wrote different subsections, and I was the person who was doing the the big final aggregation. And I mean, I cannot tell you how many rounds of editing and legal review and editing and legal review and just the anxiety I had for every fucking sentence in that report, checking the citation, going back, checking the citation. Did we get it right? Right? I think I found one mistake at one point where, we issued a correction and, and put something out after the fact, if I recall correctly. It'd be up in the Stanford library, the stacks, just a URL that was not correct or something along those lines. But the, I feel that way about everything. Even when I did the book, I mean, the sheer number of hours I spent, both hiring fact checkers and fact checking it myself, and just the, literally the anxiety over not wanting to be wrong because your credibility is on the line with this stuff. Even the Senate report, man, just knowing how many people were going to go through that thing with a fine tooth comb. And the one thing I will say is even after, with all the bullshit smear campaigns that Congress came at us with, they were never actually able to find anything in it that we didn't stand behind. They went with smears and lies where they took these numbers and turned them into bullshit because they couldn't actually find anything that was wrong to use to discredit us. So they went with lies instead. Or with we don't like your speech, so we're going to complain about your speech because we can't actually find evidence, and all the emails and things. So what happens is, the subpoenas begin to come in. And of course, we have to turn over all of our documents, all of our work product, all of the things to, all the emails that we're being asked to turn over, both with the government and with the tech companies. And of course, there's no emails in which the government is telling us to tell the platforms to do anything. But what happens is you can't exonerate yourself. This is the thing I think that people really need to understand, right? When you're hauled in front of an investigation this stupid, you actually can't exonerate yourself. You have to think about it as House Un-American Activities Committee. That is the parallel here. You will never be able to actually prove that you didn't do the thing. Because when there were not 22 million tweets, when, I was let Elon turn over the 22 million tweets. They claim that they're the Twitter files boys. Where are the 22 million tweets? Come on, show the public the 22 million tweets. I want to see them. Where are they? When they don't have them, they just move the goalposts. Oh, well, yeah, okay, maybe the government didn't actually send you anything, but some analyst flagged this tweet and we don't like that you flagged it. And I'm okay, but that's a complaint about my speech. That's a complaint about my First Amendment protected speech. That's not censorship. That's my speech. And you just wind up in this surreal universe where nobody remembers the accusation that was actually made about you. And instead they just complain about something else. And that is the process here. And for the point about the sloppiness of the Twitter files and the reporters, they're never actually held to account for it. Because they were actually asked by the minority on the Weaponization Committee to refile their testimony. Because Mehdi Hassan actually did, funny enough, go and read the report And he had Matt Taibbi on for an interview at the Twitter Files, and he pointed out that he was wrong by, that we had flagged 4,700 tweets, and this was written in the report, or sorry, 2,700 tweets, 4,700 URLs in total. And he said, you were off by like 21,997,900 and something. And why aren't you correcting this? And they just never bothered to correct it. So like that too is, sort of a surprise, right? You can perjure yourself if you're, on the right, on the side of the majority.
If I can suggest a title for the next report, if that media ecosystem can offer us any tips, it's maybe you should call it Big If True. And that should help you wiggle
the art of the shameless, right?
Yeah. The tech platforms have also sort of changed their stance on this. A platform like Facebook still has some teams, not as much resource as they used to, hunting for potential foreign influence campaigns, but their external funding of that kind of research is pretty much gone. They're rolling back a ton of content moderation. Mark Zuckerberg wrote a letter to Jim Jordan and was like, yes, it's true. Mean Joe Biden, threatened us if we didn't pull content. And a lot of these platforms are dealing with European regulators who actually have a fucking backbone and want to regulate it. Is the approach perfect? Is it correct? don't know enough to take a moral position, but they are doing something where the US government has done historically not a lot. And now it's after they've spent multiple years pummeling these platforms, pummeling researchers, as Facebook, I would expect behind the scenes, potentially, TikTok as it tries to escape being banned in the US, as these platforms sort of change their attitude and sort of not give up the fight, but really just deprioritize it a lot. The tone of Jim Jordan has been oh, come here, sweet Mark Zuckerberg, my boy. What are the Europeans doing to you? Oh my God. And it's now that they don't have Biden to blame, they're planning to go on the offensive. So I'm just curious, how much are these platforms just capitulating?
Yeah. Well, there's so much there. The first, content moderation is both hard and not always well done, right? And that's the truth of it. And content moderation, and most of what we've talked about has been, state actors and political propaganda and what is the correct response to political propaganda. So one of the things that we argued, or that I don't even say we, that I argued actually, is just that takedowns don't really work a lot of the time. I think people have different opinions depending on what you study, right? For people who study maybe militia groups, maybe the far right, maybe violent speech, I think people have different arguments about deplatforming. For a lot of the stuff that I look at, the vaccine speech, political speech, it just doesn't work. It just goes somewhere else. It doesn't actually make a difference. And so a lot of what I argued for over the years was the labeling, was the community notes. I actually think community notes are good. Was the giving users more control, was making recommendation engines better on a variety of different axes. And this is where, some of my current work actually looking at Blue Sky as an architecture that you can build on top of is actually trying to get into that question of when we say better, what do we mean and how, and trying to actually do those experiments. When we talk about the shifts that Facebook has made and the capitulations, with that letter to Jordan, the thing that was so interesting about that letter to me was that it was a response to job owning. So we went through this entire series of the arguments in which big mean Joe Biden and the Biden censorship regime, even during the time it was run by the Trump government, was demanding all of these things. He made that capitulation. Rumor was for a while to try to get out of a couple hearings and subpoenas himself. I don't know how much it's really going to pay off for him. The FTC is still kind of saber rattling over this. So is the FCC. There are, Josh Hawley. I don't know how much people pay attention to hearings in the way that I do, but Senator Schmidt, who actually, launched the Murthy v. Missouri court case that was one of these kind of canonical cases that SCOTUS actually wound up tossing, that made the allegations of the censorship industrial complex and, that the Biden censorship regime was trying to silence all of the speech. SCOTUS found no evidence of it, tossed the case. Anyway, Schmidt had a hearing on Tuesday of this week. And while most of it was performative nonsense, the most interesting point of the hearing was actually Josh Hawley saying, they had these journalists, these right-wing journalists talking about being censored, and then some free speech-focused professors on the left for the minority talking about how the real censorship was, some of the things that the administration is currently doing. Anyway, Hawley came out and just said, look, for all of what we're talking about, Mark Zuckerberg made these decisions and Mark Zuckerberg needs to be held accountable. So it was interesting to hear some of the senators still saying, for all of the capitulation and groveling you have attempted to do, we are still going to regulate you. And it is interesting to see that that dynamic continuing to come from some of the lead figures in the administration. So I think Zuckerberg is trying to buy himself friends, but it's not clear that has been successful. On the European front, you mentioned regulators with spines. This is going to really be a test of those spines, because if you followed what JD Vance has gone over to Europe to do recently, a lot of the rhetoric has been that content moderation of speech, even in the European market, where they do not have the First Amendment, where they have different views of free speech, right? Nazi speech is prohibited, for example. That Vance has made the point that European content moderation rules are censorship and that American companies shouldn't have to abide by them. And so the question is, to what extent are the European regulators really going to take a stand and actually demand that the American tech companies comply with their laws, given that this could trigger one of these stupid tariff wars or, the ways in which the administration has been rather provocatively picking fights with purported allies. It's quite clear that Vance and others in the administration don't have a particularly high regard for Europe, quite a lot of contempt there. And so it's going to be very interesting to see whether these laws are actually, whether Europe fights on that sovereignty principle. I think you're going to see Brazil encounter the same dynamic as Musk and Zuckerberg seemingly expect the administration to fight this fight for them.
I've been talking a lot. Mike, do you want to wind us down a bit? Maybe we can talk about what's the answer to all of this.
No, I want to ask a question, which is, what's it like interacting with Matt Taibbi? Which is because I've seen your Substack, and I found it very entertaining in a kind of gossipy media way, because it's fun to see people's private emails and the attitude they take. And I just found him very petulant and ridiculous is the way I would describe. Seems like just a ridiculous person who's kind of clinging on to some idea that he's still a journalist, but not really. How would you describe these interactions where he's, back and forth, reaching out for comment and getting, and kind of getting fact checked by you and vice versa?
I think it's dumbfounded is the word that that comes to mind every time I get an email from him. But it's been like this since the very first email I got, which a long time ago, he wrote me a note after I'd written an article talking about Elon Musk acquiring Twitter. And he wrote me this random email asking, how dare I write an article critical of Elon Musk? And I thought it was just the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen. And he said, why didn't you reference, and then made an allegation about a past company I'd worked at and something that they had done wrong, and why didn't I disclose it or something? And I said, can you give me the rules? You write about Title IX issues and you got tagged for sexual harassment. I don't see you disclosing that at the top of every article you write about it. So can you lay out the rules? What are they? That was my very first interaction. And then it only got better from there, I guess. When he started the Twitter files, he just sent me a note that said, I need you to comment on the fact that you worked for the CIA. And that was there was nothing there was no question in it.
Just comment on the fact.
Yeah, that was literally it. It was
comment on this publicly available information.
Yeah, and I thought what the hell does that have to do with anything actually? When I was 20, okay. And I said, okay, well, this is I'm clearly getting smeared. And I ignored it. And then sure enough, the smear started. And the way that I have chosen, I was maybe new to bad faith attacks. I'd gotten a couple, but now that I am an old pro at bad faith attacks after the last 2 years, my response is actually just to publish them, right? And just to publish the full the full unvarnished interaction, including my responses, so that people can see what I said, what they said, and that other people can make up their mind. And my frustration with Matt is that I had requested corrections on many things that he has gotten wrong. He has taken quotes that I have given and cut them in half, just foundationally changing the meaning of them. He has, again, like, just been factually wrong, not opinion. Like, I don't dispute his characterizations. I get it. He wants to, smear me, spin things. Okay, this is the way that shitty media works. Okay, I get it. But just on the factually wrong things, like getting the dates of my employment wrong, who I worked with wrong, projects he kept trying to act as if I worked on Hamilton 68. I did not. I had nothing to do with it. These sorts of things where I'm like, can you just be like, just tell the truth,
Well, it's interesting also the Elon Musk aspect of it, because this guy like really kind of presents himself as like, Jimmy journalist speaking truth to power. And it's like, have we ever encountered anyone during our lifetimes as powerful as Elon Musk? I mean, the guy literally just bought his way into being president, in so many words. I can't imagine anyone as powerful as Elon Musk. And yet
he is the richest man on the planet.
But imagine putting
Elon
on your
Musk.
Your little press cap and being like, I'm sticking up for the little guy and doing my, inflicting the power, like pain on the powerful, and like taking orders from this like cosmic freak.
How dare the richest man on the planet face criticism from the towering behemoth, Renée DiResta.
It's amazing. I did see that a lot.
Pick on someone your own size, Renée. That's what I think.
It wasn't even a mean article. It was in the Atlantic. It was fairly fair, I thought.
When you report on the kind of the sort of the MAGA right, or even just white nationalists or whatever, there's a lot of effort to sort of portray people in our position as being just like overwhelmingly powerful, and it's like it blows my mind, considering the type of very powerful people that they fluff up all the time.
I just really felt like, look, if you want to criticize the work that I did, I would just like you to actually criticize the work that I did, not make up 22 million tweets or in this particular case, in my most recent engagement with him, he was trying to discredit the idea that Russia interfered in the election by insinuating that the number that Facebook had put out, that 126 million people had seen and engaged with the Russian content, was really a number that could be dismissed because it came from me and my report. And I kept saying, it doesn't come from me. It doesn't come from my report. It comes from Facebook. And I pointed that out with links, with dates, with it's unambiguously true. There is no universe in which it's not true. And I just could not get over the fact that I had to have 6 back and forths about this. And that rather than just correcting it, he then turned it into like, well, DiResta quibbled with the number. And I didn't quibble with the number at all. Actually, I took it at face value because it was a reasonable assessment, but I quibbled with their Instagram number because it wasn't. And, it was just it's just an extraordinary thing to pick a fight over. And it like ate up a Saturday. And then I thought, okay, I can't do anything more with this. And I'm just going to go on with my life.
Well, that's what I wanted to know. I just wanted to know what it's like to interact with Matt Taibbi, particularly this new sort of mutated version of him that is like now just, completely beholden to billionaire money. I think all you can do is put out the full exchange when you deal with bad faith media. There are plenty, and I deal with conservative media and I get plenty of reasonable inquiries. And if I don't feel like it's an immediate bad faith inquiry, I don't screenshot it and toss it on the internet. But at this point, whenever something comes in from him, it's a screenshot and toss it on the internet. There's no way it's going to go well. I'm excited to see if this podcast episode makes it into Taibbi's lore. Anyway, Renée, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. Listeners, go check out Renée's book. It's called Invisible Rulers:
the people who turn lies into reality. I can't say enough good things about the book. It really
Thank
is
you.
great, Renee. Do you have anything else people should check out?
No, I'm on Blue Sky mostly, and haphazardly write newsletters sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Where can people see the Matt Taibbi email exchanges?
Oh, that's on Substack because that actually gets good SEO as opposed to newsletters. But yeah, so just Substack and ReneeDiResta.com.
Maybe Jared, can we link to it? Maybe.
Yeah. We'll put a link down in the episode description.